Hello and welcome to Health Zone. Today we have an author. He is a resident of Florissant. He wrote a book, and it's a very interesting book about the surgery room and some of the things that you might expect, or maybe things that would be unexpected. His name is Curt Chaudoin, and he wrote the book Secrets from the Operating Room: My Experiences, Observations, and Reflections as a Surgical Salesman. That's a lot.
Yes.
That is
Good to be here, Kerry. Thank you very much.
It's a mouthful. You've been a pretty busy man.
Well, I've been a very fortunate man. It was a little ironic that I got into the surgery business, having majored in journalism and English in college. I went into the business world and I started working for one of the 10 major consumer product companies in the United States. They just happened to create a surgical division, and after I had been with them for a couple of years, they asked me to head up in sales for this division. I felt pretty good about it. I was one of 5 people chosen out of 35,000 to head up this surgical division, and that's how I got my start. I've worked in the operating room for 37 years. During that period of time, I have seen every type of surgery that's imaginable. Everything from just a simple removal of a wart to orthopedic surgery to neurosurgery and even sexual reassignment surgery. I estimate during that period of time in 37 years that I have assisted in between 15 and 20,000 surgical procedures.
Now explain why a salesperson would be allowed, or not be allowed, but is required perhaps to be in the operating room.
That's a very good question, Kerry. Surgeons know procedures, but with regards to surgical corporations who make the instrumentation that are used, they're constantly putting out new technology. And as new technology comes out, it would be very difficult for surgeons to become familiar with each and every piece of equipment or every instrument that comes out on the market. Corporations go to great lengths to train salespeople and to educate them on instrumentation and also the protocol and procedures in the operating room. Some more so than others. And part of the thing I want to say is that there needs to be some standardization with regards to that. But salespeople are trained on their instruments, and the salespeople should know what the abilities of the instrumentation and equipment are, plus the limitations. And what we will do is we will go to a surgeon, meet them in their office or in the lounge at an operating room. We will discuss with them particular instruments that are used in their procedure and ask them if they would be willing to evaluate. We talk about the nuances of the instruments. We talk about the improved technology that the instrument might offer. But of course, before a surgeon can really understand and know whether it's going to fit into his or her dynamics and the way they do surgery, they would have to evaluate it in a clinical situation. So when we are in the operating room, and again, we're certified, we have to go through testing, we have to have every kind of inoculation and immunization that there is, so that we are not going to be offering any kind of pathogen to a patient.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And we have to know our way around the operating room too, because there are certain protocols and procedures that are done. But what we do is and I learned a long time ago that when you're in the operating room, you don't speak until you're spoken to. And you try to measure the level of conversation. Some procedures require a little more seriousness than others. So you kind of gauge by the conversation going on how much you can talk. But when a surgeon asks you a question, you'd better have an answer, and you'd better know the answer. Because if you don't and you hesitate, they're going to cast your instrument aside. They're going to get the instrument that they regularly use and ask you to leave the operating room. I've seen that happen many times. And rightfully so, because the surgeon not only has to have confidence in the instrumentation, but in what you know and your abilities. And what I made a habit of doing was to constantly, before the procedures, the day before, I would look at what I was going to be doing. I made it a point during my career to study anatomy and to know where surgeons were during the procedures. And in the procedures they were doing, I would memorize every step along the way. so that I would know what type of anatomy the surgeon was going through. And that way, knowing what the limitations were and what the capabilities of my instruments were, so that during the surgery, if the surgeon knows that I understand anatomy, and if I understand the capabilities of the instrumentation plus the limitations, they're going to have confidence. So they're not going to get nervous or worried during the procedure. They'll be able to tell usually within the first few minutes of using any type of new technology whether it is something that they want to apply and that they want to use further during other procedures.
How much time do you get to know the surgeon before you go in? I would think that you'd want to have some kind of knowledge of his or her, I don't want to say attitude, but their,
their background or their personalities.
Yeah.
I would just say this, it's not so much their personality or the nuances about them. You want to know, and what I always did was ask what was important to the surgeon. What was the most important thing that you want to see from instruments during the surgery? They will tell you exactly what they want to see in the instrument performing, and you can judge from them just like you can anybody when you're talking to them, what their level of interest is, how easy they might be to get along with, if they're reticent or hesitant about talking with you or divulging information. That's why if you show to them that you have the knowledge and the confidence and that you know about what you're speaking, they're going to relax and they're going to open up a lot more around you.
Right.
But before procedures start, what you might do, and I made a habit of this, obviously trying to meet the doctor away from the hospital, in an office, in a different environment. Quite often, what surgical companies will do, or even pharmaceutical companies will do, is they will set up luncheons for, say, like a group of surgeons in an office. You'll have the ability to, in a relaxed atmosphere, have a salad and a sandwich or some pizza with them, maybe talk about sports, and then you'll have a display table set up with your instruments and or your equipment, and in a very casual atmosphere, they can ask you other questions. And you can do demonstrations on vegetables or meat or something to show what the capabilities are. They can have the hands-on use of the instrumentation before you're ever in the operating room. So that's going to allay, again, some fears or concerns that they may have about the product.
Okay.
They may also want to ask you, has anybody else used the instrumentation?
Right.
If I have permission from a surgeon to use his or her name, I will do that. But if I don't, I won't share names. And I tell them that because I say, I would do the same thing for you unless you would give me permission to use your name.
Right. Now, let's move on to the book. There's a lot of information in the book. Right here you say what you want to accomplish. So tell us, what did you want to accomplish when you began writing the book?
There was so much I wanted the public to know. Every year there are 34 million procedures that are performed in the United States. And along with those 34 million procedures, people that go into surgery, Carrie, know very little, if anything, about their procedure, the surgical corporation that makes their instruments, the hospital,
Right.
the doctors themselves, the layout of the operating room. They know nothing what to expect. And they really know nothing about a surgeon that is about to invade their body and possibly affect their life,
Right.
the condition or quality of their life for a while. So I saw so many things happen in the operating room, both good and bad. And the one thing that I realized was that people do not know what their options are, and they don't know about what goes on in the operating room. And that's done purposely. The people who work in the operating room, it's a very secretive world, and they want to keep it that way for protection.
Yeah, we as just laymen and patients, we don't know what questions to ask.
That's a very good point, Carrie. People are not knowledgeable enough to know what they should ask. There's an old saying is that you don't know what you don't know until you realize you don't know it. There was another aspect of it. Along with those 34 million procedures every year, there are tens of thousands of surgical mistakes that occur. Whether it is failure of an instrument, whether it is failure of something that goes on in the operating room by a nurse or sterilization of instrumentation or a mistake by a surgeon. It happens. And when I saw these things for all the time, I was very concerned about people knowing that they have options. You have the ability to dictate many things and almost everything to your surgeon before you ever go into the operating room. Now, once they're in the operating room and they begin the surgery, they're in charge.
Right.
But I would ask everyone and suggest to everyone, first of all, I have one chapter in the book that says what you need to know and what you should do before you have surgery. And it talks about from the time that you visit your internist or your family practitioner and that doctor says, we're going to run some tests, up until the time you go into the operating room. All the options you should consider. Learn as much as you can about your condition. Learn as much as you can about the hospital. Try to talk to nurses who work with the doctors. And the way you do that is when you go to your internist or family practitioner and they tell you that they want to run some tests, they're going to send you to a specialist. When you get the results from the specialist, you're going to go back to your internist or your family practitioner and they're going to talk and discuss with you your condition. That's when you should have a myriad of questions to ask based on your research, your due diligence that you should be doing on the computer.
Right.
So that you are knowledgeable enough about the condition. But one of the primary things you want to ask your surgeon, ask your internist, if they had this condition, would they be having surgery immediately? Are there alternatives to surgery? Can therapy be done? And then if you have to have surgery and your doctor says, yes, I would have surgery, ask your doctor in the order of preference the names of 3 surgeons that he or she would have do the surgery. Then what you want to do is you want to research those doctors. There's several ways you want to do your research. Number one, there's a website in the state of Missouri, case.net. You can go on that website, put in a person's name, and find out anything and everything that has happened in a legal situation, whether it's litigations or sanctions or lawsuits, anything against that person. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that are very trusting and they say, oh, you know, this hospital is such a great hospital, or this doctor's such a great hospital, and oh, I heard that this doctor's so great. You never know what they're really like, though, what their other life is like. And there's 2 other lives really, other than the person that you see with whom you're conversing and talking to. There is, what have they done during their medical career? Have they been sanctioned? Has anybody died under their care? Have they ever been in drug and or alcohol rehab? Okay. And the other aspect is, how do they act under stress? So the key is when you get names of surgeons to consider and you do research on them, I think everybody knows a nurse of one sort or another. And in the operating room, there's an association called the AORN, which is Association of Perioperative Nurses. I would highly suggest for you to find a nephew or a niece or an aunt or a cousin, someone, if they are nurses, who can talk to and find out a nurse that works in the operating room of a hospital that you're going to choose. Because once you look at the surgeons, find out where they work. And talk to your relative or friend, have them talk to a nurse that works in the operating room, and casually ask the nurse, if he or she were going to have this type of surgery, what surgeon in the operating room would you recommend or want to have do your surgery? And the reason I say that is there are surgeons that work very well under stress. There are those who don't. And stop and think about it. If I have seen surgeons ranting and raving to the point that you wonder if they can actually concentrate on what they're doing during the surgical procedure. Now, when I say this, I'm not trying to scare people, but this is a reality.
No, I fully agree. I've heard stories. I come from a family of physicians, and stories of physicians actually throwing equipment around across the room or pushing away the instrument table, those kinds of things.
Kerry, I've had instruments thrown at me during a procedure and have been asked to leave the operating room. And I know of another situation, and this is probably the worst situation I've heard, where a surgeon at the table, and this happened in a very prestigious medical school hospital, a surgeon who was operating at the table during the procedure, got in a fist fight with one of the anesthesiologists that was working the case.
Mm.
So, and I say that again, not to scare people, but you have to realize that surgeons or doctors or people in medical profession are no different than you and me. There are some that are very good people, there are some that are indifferent, and there are some that are not very good people. And another thing that I saw is in 1751, Benjamin Franklin and Dr. Thomas Bond created the first hospital in the United States. It was Philadelphia Hospital in Philadelphia. And it was created as a mission statement and totally mission care to help the poor, the sick, and the mentally ill people who were roaming the streets of Philadelphia. It was a very progressive idea. It was a very successful venture. And Benjamin Franklin later in life was reported to have said that nothing that he did in politics gave him as much comfort or satisfaction as building that hospital and the joy of helping people. It was a true mission statement. I am sad to report today that that mission statement has taken a back seat to corporate and individual greed. Yeah. And that is another reason that I felt compelled to write this book. If I hadn't, I probably would have gone crazy, had a heart attack, or my wife would have killed me.
Yeah, one of your chapters, I think it's about understanding hospitals.
Yes,
so
sir.
That was a natural lead into that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about understanding hospitals?
There are three different types of hospitals. There are not-for-profit hospitals, and most of those are based with a religious association of some sort, and they do have a mission statement, and they do care about people. But let's face it, the medical industry, and especially the surgical industry, is high dollar volume. The operating room is the biggest profit center in the hospital. Surgery makes a lot of money. You have government hospitals, and those could be city, county, state types of hospitals, and they are exactly what they are. They're government. They're run by the government, and they're supported by our taxes, and whether it's a state on federal level, sometimes there's participation by city, state, county, and federal as far as hospitals are concerned. And then there are for-profit hospitals, and they are exactly what they say they are. They are for-profit. So the quality of care that you're going to get in the hospitals, the three different types of hospitals, and then I should say you have university hospitals that are associated with medical schools, and those are really a branch in a lot of areas of government type of hospitals. Okay, the care that you get in the hospitals will differ not only from type of hospital, but also from where the hospital is located, what area of a city or county they are, and that will determine the different types of procedures, and it also can determine where some of the better doctors are, some of the better surgeons are. So you really need to do due diligence as far as hospitals like that are concerned, because hospitals can make a difference in care.
Okay. Now, as a surgical salesman, were you aware of all the things that you needed to do before you went into the business, or was it learn as you go?
It was a reality shock to me, and I'll tell you, this occurred within the first week that I actually started in surgery, or started in my career during surgery. I was working again for this large corporation. They were very thorough in their training, and a lot of the major corporations do very thorough training. There are other companies that don't do as thorough training, and that's why I say there should be some kind of standardization on a national level, where there should be some kind of degree that you should have before you're allowed in the operating room. That protects the patient, it protects you, it protects the doctor, it protects the hospital. But the very first week after I went through my 3 weeks of training before I was allowed into the operating room, the first day I'm in surgery, I watched a hysterectomy. First procedure is always a little unnerving. Second procedure was a disarticulation of the leg, which is an amputation, and that kind of shook me a little bit. The third one, though, was the one that really got to me, and that was I was working a trauma case. A young man came in who'd been in an automobile accident. He was brought in to the operating room, and while they were preparing him for surgery, he went into cardiac arrest. and the operating room turned immediately from a professional, calm mode to emergency mode, loud voices screaming and yelling. I was mandated to immediately leave the operating room, and I immediately left the operating room. And I went to the nurse's lounge, and I was pretty upset. Here I am the first day in surgery, and already there's a potential for a young man to pass away. The OR nurse, who was the circulating nurse, came to meet me in the nurse's lounge about an hour later, and unfortunately the young man had expired. And she could tell I was upset. And she said, Curt, if I could give you some advice, if you choose to stay in this industry, don't ever take anything personally that you see. The yelling and screaming that was going on was situationally oriented, not personally oriented. And if you take anything that you hear or see personally, you're going to go to an early grave. Mm-hmm. And I went back to my motel room that night, and I thought about it, and I thought, I can't give up on this, I have to try. But I promised myself along that pathway, Carrie, that what I would do is I would be as prepared as possible for any situation. And I was fortunate because the companies for whom I worked were bigger corporations that gave me the proper preparation that I need to go in so that I was ready. But I took that several steps further because I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly everything that was going to happen along the way so that there would be no surprises. Mm-hmm. And that was from kind of like a CYA approach too, from the standpoint that I wanted to make sure that the information that I was giving was correct so that I wouldn't feel bad about someone's health, me being responsible for that if something went awry. But I can honestly say, because of that, for 37 years I didn't sleep. Because every night I would go over in my mind the procedures that I had to do the next day and the steps to make sure that I had the necessary supplies, the backups and everything, and that I knew exactly what I was going to be doing.
You're simply explaining professionalism. And
well, thank you.
Anytime you are involved in a high dollar profession such as that, you must be prepared. And this is no different.
That's very true, Carrie, because there's so much liability and so much pressure and stress because, you know, and everybody has pressure and stress in their lives, in their jobs, in their family situations. But I will say one thing, this is a little different because this makes the difference between people's lives. Mm-hmm. So it raises the bar and the level of that stress immensely.
Yeah. Now, getting back to something you said mm-hmm. earlier about people in the operating room. A few months ago, I had a surgical procedure, and I was not prepared for all of the people that were there. There were more people. I was expecting maybe 4 people. There were like 8 people. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, what are these 8 people doing in here? I'm not having a heart replaced or anything.
Right, right. Well, this is one of the things that I am adamant about. And I mentioned the chapter where I tell people what they should know before surgery. You have control over who is in the operating room. And at any one time, now there are people who need to be in the operating room. Obviously, you have the surgeon who's going to operate on you. He's called the attending surgeon. Now, he may have an assistant, a surgeon with him. He may have a physician's assistant who helps during the procedure. There will be scrub nurses at the table. There will be circulating nurses who work as a liaison between passing instruments from non-sterile fields to sterile fields to the scrub techs. There will be an anesthesiologist or a nurse anesthetist. Depending on the type of procedure that you have, there may be several salespeople in the room. Now, there may be another surgeon in there who the attending surgeon might ask to help and actually do part of the surgery. There may be, if you're in a medical school hospital, there may be residents in there who are doing surgery. You have the ability to determine if those people are in the operating room or if you don't want them in the operating room. And this may sound strange, but I recommend to all people that are going to have surgery is to not have salespeople in the room unless that doctor can tell you that they have had at least 3 to 5 years experience in their particular area, especially like in orthopedics. Whether orthopedics and in neurosurgery, those representatives are usually very well trained, and they are not allowed to go out, quote unquote, on their own to do a procedure unless they are quite capable. But you can tell the surgeon, I don't want any new instrumentation used on me. I want you to do it the traditional way that you've always done it. And the reason I say that, and even though I sold new technology, I have seen hundreds and hundreds of instruments fall apart inside of patients, causing damage to tissue and organs, where they have gone from, say, laparoscopically or minimally invasive procedures to full open procedures. And I've also seen situations that have cost people their lives. So it's important to know these things. It's important to know that, and when you do this, your surgeon is going to have more respect for you, because they're going to know that you have a higher level of knowledge. You're going to feel like you're in a partnership with your surgeon. It's going to help allay fears, and it's also going to give you more confidence, because you're going to feel like you're making decisions with your doctor that are going to determine what goes on during the procedure, which I firmly believe is going to help improve your surgical outcome.
So the attitude of the patient they need to understand that you're not just a patient, you're a partner in this
Yes,
whole
sir,
situation.
that's exactly right. And you have the ability to say, I don't want this salesman in the room, I don't want this resident, I don't want residents working on me, I want the doctor, and there's a typical term for this. It's, you want the attending surgeon to do the procedure skin to skin. That means from the time the first incision is made until closing, with one exception. There are surgeons' aides, first assistants, and physicians' aides and physicians' assistants who do closing, and they do the suturing. Quite often they're better than the surgeons
good.
because they do most of it. Right. So they're very good at it. Very good at it.
You've got an awful lot of information in this book, and we just don't have enough time. This is a great book. I recommend it highly. And where can they find it?
Kerry, it's available at Amazon.com and also Barnes & Noble. It's available here locally at Left Bank Books out in the Central West End. It is in e-form, it's in paperback, and it's also in hardback. And I have never asked anybody to buy my book, and I won't.
Buy the book.
But I would ask this, for anybody who chooses to buy the book, I would please ask them to write something about it, do a review of it. I won't tell them what to say, but quite often before people buy books, they look at reviews to see what people have to say about it. And I will say this, there are many, many great people that work in the operating room. The majority of them are. Unfortunately, there are a few, as in any profession, who are less scrupulous. And I want everybody to have a good outcome. I've seen too much heartache and grief that's gone on in the operating room, but I've also seen some of the more wonderful and most wonderful things performed by incredibly brilliant and gifted surgeons who save people's lives every day. And I will say this, the OR nurses are probably the finest and most professional group of workers I have ever seen in my life. They are the true caregivers. They really know the doctor's next move and are there with instrumentation to help them. They are troopers, and I have the utmost respect for them.
Great. Curt, thanks.
Thank you,
Curt.
I appreciate it. It's my pleasure.
It took us a long time to get together, and I am so happy that we finally got together to shoot this. You guys read the book and give reviews, and we will see you next time on Health Zone. I'm Kerry Luster. You guys take care. Bye.